Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Mastin Kipp. I'm here with my dear friend, Dr. Scott Lyons, the founder and creator of the Embody Lab, and we are talking about the Somatic EMDR certification. And also just Scott and I have friends, and we've done some podcasts together, but I want to go deeper on this specific topic with you, Scott, today and talk more about this incredible opportunity for folks to learn. So it's nice to see you. Thanks for doing
Nice to see you
this.
too. Thank you, my friend.
So I'm just kind of curious, like you have so many letters after your name. So, right, I mean, all of the letters of the entire alphabet. So you're an osteopath, you're a psychologist. Tell me a little bit more about your background and what got you into like trauma-informed work, polyvagal-informed work, somatics, all that type of stuff. I'm so curious.
Yeah. So I was actually in a college course when I was like 15 and
No big deal. 15.
it's just a small no. And it was way I was in it was a advanced biopsychology class at the university and I talked my way in and I had a little nervous breakdown in the middle of the class, and the only class that hadn't started in the entire university was a class called Body Mind Centering. So, which
Hmm,
is a somatics modality, one of the more,
perfect.
yeah. And so they put me in that class because all the other classes had started, and I was like, oh my gosh, this has been what I've been looking for all my life, which is 15, 16 years of feeling
Hmm,
so dissociated, so disconnected from other people and myself, and trying to find the answers through psychology and academics. And really, on the first class, we were rolling on the ground, crawling and toning into our organs. And I was like,
hmm,
I think I found a little bit of myself. And through each of the classes, and then I started doing the 10-year training program the year after that in body mind centering.
hmm,
And I just felt like I understood what home is.
hmm. I
And
love that.
so, yeah. And so that I knew at 15, I was like, I'm going to dedicate my life to this field. I'm going to study every form of somatics I can possibly get my hands on. And then I'm going to return back to medicine. I'm going to return back to psychology. I'm going to return back to my love of science and even art and reintegrate this somatics back into this place where there's such a deficit of
Yeah.
home.
Yeah, big time. There's
Yeah.
such a yeah, I love that deficit of home, deficit of self, definitely.
Yeah.
Sometimes trauma is described as a lost sense of self,
Yeah.
and maybe in your language, a lost sense of your actual body also.
Yeah.
Um, what is your like, I guess like as a psychologist, what is like your clinical background in working with clients? Like what is your
Yeah.
approach and like how does somatics inform your approach? I'm curious because I think when people think psychologist, they think, I don't know, I think the psyche, they think mind, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think in most cases it is. It's psychology has often been associated with talking, and we can't talk our way out of trauma because
Hmm.
that's assuming that trauma just happened and got stored in the place where we can talk from, which is absolutely not true. We know
I
that the
love
body
that. Yep.
keeps the score. So we can't talk our way out of trauma. We can only feel our way through it. And the thing that gets so fragmented, and trauma is the great fragmenter.
Yes.
That is what it is. It fragments us from feeling our own feelings and sensations, our own ability to connect to other people, to ourselves. And so,
Mm.
in that way, it makes it almost impossible. It creates this loop that challenges the fundamental nature of healing.
Yes.
So, in that way, again, we have to feel our way through trauma, and yet we can't feel because numbness is a part of the protection from trauma itself
That's right. Yep.
and the fragmentation that happens.
Yeah. And so when you think about like your work as a psychologist, like
Yeah.
when working with clients,
Yeah.
obviously I'm sure there's talking,
Yep.
but there's
Yeah.
also feeling and how do
Sensing and action. Yeah. I mean,
I'm curious about that because I think when I think about psychology and therapy, I just think about like I have a long list of understanding of what happened
yeah.
cognitively,
Yeah.
but like I don't usually hear psychologists, therapists talk about action.
No. So, one of the things when we talk about the body keeps a score, and the association is often like, it's like the trauma just gets glued on and it's like holding it there. That's partially true. That's a piece of the puzzle when we say the body keeps a score. The other many pieces is that we adapt to the trauma. We
Yeah.
start to build compensatory patterns. We might even look at it like shame has a real body response, right? Or tension of any sort. So there's all these compensatory patterns that are held within the body. And there are biological responses, even in our immune system, to the posturing,
Yep.
to the ways we start to orient the world from that posturing, and belief systems that also get stored in the body. And all of those are implicit, reflexive.
Yes.
And so when we're talking about the body keeps a score, we're talking about the belief systems, we're talking about the posturing, we're talking about the physiology that's on a loop as though the trauma is still happening
Yes.
itself. We're talking about the actual impact and shock of where our body was able to maybe process it or metabolize it and where it wasn't. And so as we're talking about doing somatic psychology, what we're talking is really about this holistic perspective of moving through all the layers that got impacted and torqued or
Mm,
fragmented in that process. So even the process thing of like, maybe I might invite someone to feel their arm and feel weight again. Because one of the elements of trauma and fragmentation is a bracing, right?
yes.
Or a
Yes.
collapse.
Yes.
Usually there's underneath the bracing is actually a collapse.
Yes.
And in that
Oh yeah. I love,
collapse,
oh, that's so true, actually. Yeah, I love that.
yeah.
That's well said. So true. Why else would it be bracing?
Why else would we bracing? We're trying to hold ourselves in the fragmented pieces together.
Makes me want to cry almost. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. And as a somatic psychologist, what I'm looking for is like, oh, I could just help someone go take an exhale and release the bracing, but then they're collapsed and back in the fragmentation. And so there's all of these processes of titrating it to help release the collapsing, help release the tension, help release the patterns and the thoughts and the beliefs that were still in the trauma in a way that's still integrating and not just disorganizing back
Yes.
into chaos.
Yes. I love that. That is so well said. And I don't think I need to have any more questions about the difference between what you do and cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's lovely.
Well,
Um,
I love to integrate cognitive behavioral
well,
therapy.
integrate, yes,
Yes,
but like I think
integrate.
as a
Uh,
silo, it's
yes.
just like,
But
there's
how
more
could,
to life than that.
yeah, it's, one of the factors that makes someone help someone heal is the deep impact of being witnessed.
Yes.
One of the many things that is missing that then qualifies our experiences as trauma is the resources of support, of relationship, of being held and received in something that is too much or not enough for us.
Yes. Yes.
And
Mm.
um and that's so important to bring back in our sessions. And we can only really witness someone if we're just listening to their words, we're not actually listening to their whole story. So to
Yes.
be able to attune
Mm.
to their body and help them attune to their body helps bring back that missing resource from the impact of the trauma, which is to be deeply validated and witnessed and held.
Well, as your friend also, I can tell you
Yeah.
that you are phenomenal at that. I'll just say
Thank
that right
you.
now because I have been very witnessed by you in many times where I've fallen apart. So that is something that I know that you live as a value.
Yeah.
And I love the way you articulate that too. So that's so beautiful. So somatics. So I think we have an understanding of you and understanding of sort of
Yeah.
somatics. So then now let's talk about like specific modalities right there because there's
Yeah.
so many modalities. And I think people go
Mhm.
modality obsessed.
Yeah.
And of course, EMDR is this. A lot of people talk about it.
Hmm.
Um, some people know what it is. Some people don't know what it is. So before we talk about somatic EMDR,
Yeah.
for someone who's a practitioner, who's sitting here listening to us or watching us right now, like
Hmm.
maybe, or maybe they think they know what EMDR is. Like I just was joking with you one day. I was like, isn't it just like moving your fingers back and forth? Like that's
Yep.
EMDR, but like what, like I know it's eye movement desensitization and reconsolidation or something like
Hmm.
that. But
Yeah.
like
Eye
what does that
movement
mean?
desensitized and reprocessing.
Reprocessing. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
reprocessing.
Yeah.
So what is that though? Like what is EMDR from a clinical perspective and why is it effective?
Yeah, and there is the meme of that we often think about of EMDR as like the eye movement, and I'll talk about that. It's part of what we call bilateral stimuli,
Yep.
and I'll give even a little example of how that works with everyone too. But essentially, EMDR it weaves together a bunch of different elements of therapy, including like cognitive behavioral therapy, little body-centered therapy, and it's really intended to address PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and it was delivered or it's delivered in a protocol process. Step one, step two, step three, step four, step five, step six, step seven, eight, which helps people really feel a sense of familiarity in the process. And it's really about going through each trigger, each emotional trigger or belief or memory and creating space.
Yes.
So, one of the things that happens in trauma, as you know, is we time collapses,
Hmm.
right? So we don't register that the trauma is of the past. And it keeps replaying through our physiology as though it's happening now. And we
Yes.
keep a mesh with it. And so we don't have the ability. And another challenging part is the part of our brain that gives us the ability to witness gets segmented, disconnected from the part of our being that experiences sensation and feeling.
So
So
brain
when,
separate from body and
yeah,
body lost in time, basically.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well said. And so EMDR helps create that space. Yeah. I'll give you a little paper example of EMDR.
Okay. Okay.
So this is our body. We have an impact, right? A stressor, whatever we want to call it, like a fight with a partner, a car accident. And in if we have the integrity and the resources available, the stimuli, the impact, the stressor will just move through. Yeah, it will certainly create waves, but it will move through.
Yes.
Now, if it's too much for our system or not enough, what ends up happening in that paper is fragmentation.
Yep. Love that.
And what it's really nearly impossible to make a to understand and to make sense of it and to process it when the pieces are so separated out,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
And so EMDR helps weave back the pieces
Mm.
and gets you space so you can go, oh, this is what's happened and it's not happening now.
Love that. I love
And
that.
it's really, I mean, there is a specific techniques to do that, but it's such a powerful process. And I say, and I shared this with you, that if you want to do trauma informed work, you have to be doing somatic or EMDR work. And I would go so far as to say actually somatic EMDR work because
Yeah,
there are problems with the EMDR process. It
totally.
yeah,
Well, so to that end, I think the next question,
yeah,
just the question just came to mind. So I had a client
yeah,
once who went through a very public trauma with a very public situation
yeah,
and uh, had intense trauma around it. It was complex trauma. It involved legal system and a bunch of things. And
yeah,
as they were working with me, a coach,
yeah.
um, they brought up that they actually ended up in the ER
Hmm.
after an EMDR session.
Hmm.
And when I heard this person say that,
Yeah.
my first thought was, I don't think it was the EMDR. I think it was probably the practitioner because my experience has been that modalities are secondary to the safety or relational reliance between the client and the practitioner.
Hmm.
But like just trying to understand like what would cause someone to go outside, I guess you would call it the window of tolerance,
Yep.
right?
The window of
Um,
capacity.
window of
Yeah.
capacity, right? Or the ladder of tolerance if Deb Dana
Yep.
were here, right? Right. But like, and how is that like maybe mitigated by a somatic approach? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, we weave together a nervous system focused, a polyvagal, informed approach. And it's like, okay, if I'm closing my eyes as a therapist and my client is walking towards a cliff and I just keep talking to them, how would I be able to know that they're too close to the cliff to keep processing? Or I say, let's pause here. Or, and if their eyes are closed at the same time because they don't know the process, of course they're going to come too close to the edge or sometimes pass. A somatic approach is letting us as practitioners open our eyes and the clients open their eyes to be able to track what is happening in their body and when do we need to pause, when do we need to bring in more resources? When do we need to do alternative steps in the process as opposed to a really rigid protocol?
Yeah,
And when do we need to bring in other aspects of modalities like parts work,
right.
like we do in somatic EMDR, or more polyvagal toning practices like we do in somatic EMDR? We have to be able to be with them and know what's happening without them being able to articulate it in order to truly guide someone in a safe way.
That makes sense. So I'm gonna, maybe this isn't exactly accurate. Would it be safe to say that traditional EMDR is more of a cognitive process?
Hmm.
So it's we've talked about mind separate from body, body
Yeah.
stuck in time. If
Yeah.
mind is separate from body and body is stuck in time, and we're just doing the cognitive work,
Yeah.
that could unlock something in the body that you're unaware of, which could cause some type of really intense response.
Yeah.
So is
It
this a,
can.
I'll use somatic experiencing language. Is this a
Yeah.
way of more titrating and attuning to something so that you can access the repressed memories or the memories that are not integrated? But like maybe it's not, is it slower? Is it more tuned? Like what's the
It's
what makes
it's
it
more
different, I guess?
yeah, it's more tuned, it's more paced to the client as opposed to pacing to the hour of the session.
Yep.
And it's understanding the thing about somatic EMDR is it's more process oriented. So here's a really interesting thing and why EMDR didn't work for me and why I fell in love with it because it didn't work for me because I wanted
Mm,
to know why. And then I wanted to gather a group of like-minded souls and figure out how do we figure out and amend it. And so like, okay, I had that space from what was is stored in my body, but it's still stored there. Just because I
yeah.
have space from there doesn't actually complete the trauma process. And so the somatic piece of this actually goes into this material and helps metabolize, process, and finish or complete the unexpressed trauma responses that never
Yes.
got to be finished. And so the
Yep.
two, the ability to witness and the ability to process all the way through is what truly creates a informed and safe process towards trauma healing.
I love that. And
Yeah.
obviously because it's polyvagal informed too. I
Yeah.
mean, like, we know Dr. Porges and Deb
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And they one of the things I love so much about the polyvagal perspective is that safety is the treatment. So I'm
Thank you.
assuming that there's in the context of what you're doing here, like
Mhm.
how do you address, I guess, relational safety and attunement in this certification?
Yeah, we actually have sessions on that and complete sessions
Oh,
on
love that. Perfect.
yeah. I mean, it's absolutely it's there from the beginning of how are we tracking each other's nervous systems? What are the cues? What are we looking for? What is the process of titration and creating relationality in this process? Because EMDR in its classical form is not relational.
Mm,
Somatic EMDR is deeply relational, relational to the individual, so it's not just a protocol being thrown at someone, it's what is happening in response to each step.
yes. I
And
love that.
what's happening here is also part of the healing process, and that's integrated as well.
I love that. Was there a specific moment that made you want to combine these two approaches? Like, did something happen? Was it just like an idea? Like,
Yeah, I mean, when I first trained in EMDR, um, and I brought it I tried it, it didn't work for me. I kept trying it. I kept going, there's something interesting here, but I don't know why it's not working. And then I started applying it to my clients, and I was like, oh, if I bring in my work from body mind centering, that bilateral stimulus, which I know quite a lot about, which is about integrating the brain halves. There's also a lot of other fun science we can go into and will go into in the program about what happens. But essentially, I started to notice the changes, but I wasn't following the protocols. And I started deviating from the protocol even more and really going, okay, yes, we've created that separation, that space. Huh. Now there's still something left over. How do I
Mhm.
address that? And so that really became like the spark. Now in our program, we still teach the basic protocol because it is very good at creating the space. But then we use that as a launching point to bring in the somatic EMDR protocol and process.
That makes
So we,
sense.
yeah. So
Makes
it's
a ton of
building
sense.
on it and then being able to do much more advanced, sophisticated work.
Okay, I love that.
Yeah.
And I guess like what type of stuff can this approach like be useful for? Like is it like would you like when you go through this, are you trauma
Yeah.
informed? Are you trauma trained? Can you take someone to their worst memory and help them process it? Like I guess like can you do it for performance? Like what type of
Yeah.
things can
Yeah.
people
I
do?
mean, we have a whole session dedicated to integrating into pain work, chronic pain work, improving relaxation, because that actually is something you have to train people into, as you know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I work with it with performers. We have dentists who use it, who've done our training program, a lot of teachers, because we also have a whole class on how do you integrate this into group work and self work when there isn't a practitioner there.
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
you know, it doesn't have to be just trauma focused. We can pick what's called the target or the focal point and really work through it in multiple ways of like just even enhancing a sense of like self-esteem and self-worth through this process. It doesn't always
Totally.
have to be quote unquote a negative affect or negative issue. It can actually be about generating more positive affect or positive experience.
Totally. Well, and
Yeah.
that's what I love about that is I'm a big fan of Leah McCullough, who created
Hmm.
affective phobia therapy.
Yeah.
And her like her her approach, one of the things that stood out to me as her like her sequence was,
Yeah.
okay, well, once you've dealt with all this negative emotion, you
Yeah.
actually have to start generating positive emotions about yourself.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, that's
Yeah.
actually like something people have to tolerate, like literally
Yeah.
tolerate. It's not like, oh my God, I go from my trauma's healed and now I'm this like super happy character. So
Yeah.
how does this process, I guess, or how does somatic EMDR help people cultivate, I guess you could say, more positive affect? And is that bypassing trauma?
No, that's a great question. I remember a client I had, it was in my early 20s, and we were working through a memory that was happy for her, and she went into collapse. And it was such an interesting process, and I used somatic EMDR then to build more affect tolerance and understand that the belief system of if I'm happy, then it will overshadow my mother was the belief
Yes.
system buried in with the happiness that kept collapsing it.
Yeah. Which is
And so
also probably attachment too, right? It's
which
belief and attachment, right?
belief
Yeah.
and attachment. Yeah. And so we were able to really create the space to see the belief, see her mom for the first time as something that she didn't have to be the parent for
Yes. Oh, wow.
and to also eventually receive the impact of what it was to override her own emotions and experiences consistently and never have the sense of safety with her
Yes.
affect. And so a lot of the same work can be it's the same as work that we would do for anger or fear or sadness or happiness. All of that is built into the same like journey, let's call it, of somatic EMDR.
Yeah, I love that. And so also just because I'm like,
Yeah.
you know me, I'm like mechanistic geek, right? So
Yeah.
like there's a difference between somatic responses, which my understanding, you're the goat on this, goat greatest of all time. But like so correct me if I'm wrong. But
Yep.
to me, what I might understand somatic responses are of the body, which are part and partially different from emotional responses, which are more biochemical peptides and neuropeptides and stuff like that. So, do you help people differentiate between emotion and body sensation?
It's an interesting process. I don't find it as helpful. There's a certain level of discernment that is helpful of like going, oh, that's a thought. Is it true?
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Is that reality? Is that truth? Okay. That's an important discernment. When we get to an emotion, we're going into, well, what is the sensations of that emotion? How do I get to know it beyond the label of it?
Yes.
And if I'm already just saying, oh, let's separate emotion from sensation, then I'm already taking away the possibility of getting curious and getting informed
Mm,
by it.
interesting. So you got your approach is to sort of put a somatic and emotional response in the same category or the same, I guess, relationship, basically.
Somatics is the language to which we can be curious and understand the qualities of something like emotions. So we can get to know it. Everything wants in us wants to be known, right?
Yes. Mm,
Everything wants to be known. And so, what is the language of the body is somatics. It is our
yes.
first language. Long before we spoke English or Russian or Spanish, we all spoke the language of the implicit, the
That's right.
language of sensation and breath and movement, and we understood the world through it. That language did not disappear even as we had to sit in our desk all day and be sort of, collapsed.
Yes.
That language we call intuition. It's lots of different things embedded in that, including emotions. Like I can say, I'm sad. Do I look sad? Do I feel sad when I say that?
Not
Versus
necessarily.
and so the way I might go in with, oh, where does that sadness reside in your body? What lets you know in your breath that there's sadness here? So I'm using the somatics to actually deepen in to our understanding of the emotion so that the emotion might be a compass towards met or unmet needs.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, what I love about that too is it seems like it's very process oriented too, like sequential of like how do you know you're sad or what does that mean to you? Which I love because my roots are in neurolinguistic programming,
Mhm.
and those Bandler and Grinder were so process oriented also,
Yeah, absolutely.
because I think that also makes it less scary also,
Yeah.
and because those processes happen so fast and automatically reflexively that
Yeah.
to slow that down, to be able to locate a target and then slow down what's happening within the
Yeah.
system and to understand it and deconstruct it and then kind of put it back together seems like really beautiful and
Yeah.
powerful. And like kudos to you for being able to combine those things and create this incredible framework that you've done here. So I'm curious about, like, let's say someone's watching this,
Hmm.
maybe they're a coach, like for me,
Hmm.
right? Like, I have a certification in Hatha yoga. I
Hmm.
dropped out of college to get my dream job. Could I sign up for this program? What about, do I have
Yeah.
to be a therapist? Do I have to be a doctor, lawyer? Like how does, help me understand like who
Yeah.
is this program is for?
Yeah. Up until the Embody Lab, EMDR has been hidden behind the veil of a license, meaning you could only take it if you were a licensed therapist. And I disagree. And there's, the everyone who is a faculty member and who also helped create this program, also psychologists, we're all in disagreement with that ideology. Trauma does not exist within the confounds or the walls of a therapist office. It still
Yes.
exists when it leaves, when that individual leaves or that group leaves the office. I was sharing a story recently about my sister, who's a school teacher, and as
Mm,
we in based in the United States of America, and I was having a conversation with her and realizing that she, in her position, was actually experiencing and navigating more trauma than I was as a therapist on every day with a bigger array of people.
mm.
And I was like,
With less prefrontal cortexes probably too,
you
because
read
of children.
prefrontal cortexes and less skills given. And I
Yeah.
was like, well, what? I was like, my sister deserves the same sense of empowerment to support people as I do. Just because I have a license does not mean that she's not entitled to that empowerment and those individuals that she could help. That is so the priority. So, what
Yes.
is our priority and our values? And my values say to make therapy, especially somatic coaching work and therapy work and the modalities and the tools more accessible. If more people have this embodiment, if more people have these tools, how much faster could we create transformation and change in the world?
That's right.
And
That's right.
so that is my wholehearted belief system that that is what we create our programming from. So, yes, if you're a school teacher, if you're a dentist, if you're a coach, if you're a therapist, we offer the program to everyone who's interested. Is there a scope of practice? Yeah. If and that's also our responsibility. We're adults here. And
Hmm.
I think
Yep.
that's so important to recognize. If it is so important to be like, whoa, we're getting into territory that feels beyond my capacity. I can't settle in my own seat. This is the power of somatics. If I am not breathing, if I can't find my own weight in my
Mm.
chair, if I can't be with that person, I'm out of my scope of practice. If I also might go, hey, we're going into, there's so much work in trauma healing. I would say 80% of it is not going into the deep end of the pool of the memory and in the deep impact of it. So all of us can be doing that other 80%, which is such an impact. And usually, not always, will actually allow that 20% to also just metabolize organically.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's so well said. One of the things that I did, because with the work that we do, we're very scrutinized and
Yeah.
target
Yep.
because of the platform that we have,
Mhm.
and we do our best to be above board with everything we can and have the best, um, you know, uh, values and just like the way that we operate and stuff like that, and safety protocols and all these things.
Mhm. Yeah.
And like for example, in my practice, like one time I had multiple times I've had suicidal ideation present in clients that I didn't go
Mhm.
looking for that just emerged as an
Mhm.
emergent property. And I'm so grateful that I was trained in things. 'Cause it's not like I would advertise that that's within my scope of practice, and it's not, but I was the one on the scene.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
was there. Like, and if I wasn't there, they would be by themselves, which is far worse.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of curious, like, because what I've kind of gathered is that when I look at like therapy
Mhm.
and psychology, but specifically therapy,
Yeah.
the basic scope of practice, my understanding is to assess and diagnose mental
Mhm.
illness
Mhm.
as prescribed by maybe the DSM or the IDC, um, and then create a treatment plan for that mental illness.
Mhm.
And so what I do is I just look at people and I'm attuned to them and I'm working with them, and I
Mhm.
don't call it a mental illness, but it's all stemming from the nervous system. There's physiological responses. So how do we delineate between like a therapy practice, which is like state licensure boards and stuff like that,
Mhm.
and like working with trauma? Because even like I looked up in California, for example, to become an LMFT in California, there are programs that offer trauma in their
Mhm.
training, but there are lots of therapists and clinical psychologists that don't even really have much trauma training in their work to become a therapist or psychologist. So I
Mhm.
guess like if someone's like, I want to do this, but maybe I'm not qualified because it's trauma informed, can we maybe delineate between therapy, coaching, trauma, mental illness, and that scope for just a second? Can we break that down?
Yeah. And again, like EMDR's original intention of working with post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD doesn't mean that that's the only place you can use it, right? If I'm like you mentioned a performer before and they get butterflies before they go on stage, you can use this. If
Yeah,
I'm um, having chronic pain, you can use this. You don't have to dive into the worst memory. In fact, the beautiful thing about EMDR is as a therapist, I may never actually know the memory.
right.
We may never actually speak the memory or have to go into the details of it to get the effect.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
and what's amazing is 80 to 90% people, and this is from the research and the studies, show a significant increase of like well-being or less of the symptoms after 2 to 3 sessions of EMDR.
Mm.
It's really fast results because it gets you that space out of the loop, out of the cycle. And then somatic EMDR gets you into the metabolizing of that. And there's it gets a little like it again, it's about values. And it's like um I mean, as a psychologist, I don't necessarily go and say like, okay, I'm with you. Now I'm going to diagnose and put a label on you. That's
Right.
I come from a humanistic background where we threw the DSM out the window,
Yeah.
right? And it says, you're not a label, you're a human. You're not a traumatized person, you're a human that went through the experiences, had these adaptations out of survival. And now some of those adaptations are blocking you from the things you want to feel and do in life
Yes.
versus you're mentally ill or you get this label or you get this diagnosis. And so, that whole process is dehumanizing.
Totally.
And for some
I
people,
love
that
that.
really works. And so, like, and some therapists who might even, be watching this say, that's really important to me. And you know what? Then use it.
Totally.
I
Yeah.
think humanization or humanistic approaches also and go, if that feels like it works for you and your clients, then great. If that helps the client feel held and recognized to have that label, fine. As
Right.
long as the fundamental sense of relationality,
Yes.
which again is the missing, often such a big missing link as to why the trauma actually occurs, right? We can have a big impact for what you might not be a big deal. For me,
Yep.
it might be a huge deal because I didn't have the support underneath it for it to be held,
Yeah.
right?
Totally. Totally.
So
So
bringing back the relationality is fundamental.
which is yeah, I mean that's I think that's one of our core values also, which is
Yeah.
why we get along so well. So, but just to be clear, so if someone goes through this program and they're a coach, it's not like now they're an EMDR therapist,
Well, you couldn't use the word therapist,
right? So
but
what could you call yourself?
you could say anywhere you want that you integrate somatic EMDR practices into your
Okay.
coaching.
So protocol, not not like so it's you can talk about the protocol that you're trained in, but not necessarily add in the label therapy, therapist, etc., unless you have that license. Just so
Yeah,
we're super clear
therapist
for
is
people.
therapist is a domain that is governed by whatever province or state that you're in, the use of the word therapy or therapist. So if it doesn't fit within where you live, you can't use the term.
So you can be
Uh,
a therapist who does EMDR, but you can do EMDR and not be a therapist.
correct.
Okay, clear.
Yeah.
So make sure people are really clear on that scope.
Yeah, you can integrate this as much as you want into your coaching practice and your dental practice. I have, like I said, someone last year who actually does this work with their clients as a or patients as a
Yeah.
dentist.
Well, that makes sense
It's
because dentists is
brilliant.
going to a dentist's office is super traumatizing.
Yeah, it's
So
actually one of the most traumatizing
yeah,
experiences that we go through consistently. And can they call themselves they don't call themselves a therapist. It's not within their domain. They're
yeah,
a doctor. They're a medical
exactly.
doctor.
Yeah.
Or a dental doctor. And
Oh,
yeah, so can they use it? They do, and it works great. It's within the scope of their practice. Yeah,
yeah, I love that. Okay, cool.
yeah,
Yeah, so I just want to be clear about that because I think people
yeah,
I think people sometimes automatically assume trauma equals therapy, but it doesn't necessarily. To me, it's mental
mm,
illness and diagnosis equals therapy. Working with a person is just it's nervous system to nervous system with a protocol,
yeah,
basically. So that makes a ton of sense. So
yeah,
let's talk a little bit about the certification itself. So
yeah,
it sounds like you have some incredible teachers and people who are in this program, obviously. So can you let us
yeah.
know a little bit about like who's teaching
Mhm.
and how this program works?
Yeah. Dr. Ariel Schwartz is in the program.
Love her. She's
Love
fire in a
her.
person.
She's amazing. She actually wrote the book on somatic EMDR and was a great collaborator, is an amazing teacher. Um, and weaves in parts work and weaves in polyvagal theory and weaves in all these other elements to again really like fill in the missing gaps for of EMDR and use the EMDR because it is potent to begin with, but has some gaps in them.
Yes.
We have Bessel van der Kolk who wrote the book The Body Keeps a Score.
Yeah, sold a few copies.
He's sold a few copies. So there's a interview lecture with
That's
him.
epic.
There's Kai Cheng Tom, who's one of the most stunning teachers in teaching process-oriented work, which means like, okay, there's always material underneath the surface that needs to come out as part of that healing. And Kai teaches this fundamental, this it's absolutely stunning work of how do you get to that material that's just underneath the surface that needs to be seen and heard and named through dialogue skills, but is hard for anyone to really, as a client, just to be able to say. It, it
Yes.
it's it's amazing, incredible work. Um, like Carrie Powers, who's teaching intergenerational and cultural trauma and complex trauma in relation to somatic EMDR.
Wow.
There's a few more faculty who are just all weaving in their incredible knowledge of somatics, different modalities, Hakomi, body mind centering, um, somatic experiencing, and it's not like a hodgepodge of things. We we created a whole modality, but we weave in
Yep.
a lot of the technology of somatics that we all have from different backgrounds to enhance this process and protocol.
I love that. And how long is it?
It's 60 hours. So
And do I have to be there live or is it recorded or?
it's a good question. You do not have to be there live. So it takes place over 4 weekends, not consecutively. And the process is basically that you can come live. You can come live to some of it. All the recordings are yours for life, so you can watch it over and over and over again as you might want to and should. There's assistants in the program that you will meet, and if you want to do supervision with them, you can connect with them and get mentorship or supervision after the program. And it's a really comprehensive and accessible program, and it's like you know, in a world that is used to have like programs that were like 3 to 5 years long in somatics, or my first program was 10 years long, this is really condensed down to like what do you need to know, make it accessible, make it embodied.
Yep.
So you're not getting just didactic lectures, you'll have lectures, but you also get the wisdom from experiential practices as well.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And I guess like, will you help people or can they ask questions about how they can integrate this with whatever their current approach or
Yeah.
modality is? Like, is that a part of it also?
Yeah, we definitely have sessions that are like ask the faculty. So there's also a on the online platform a whole place where you can connect with other coaches or other therapists or other school teachers or other dentists about like how are you applying the work and how is it going?
Okay, so just a couple more questions about this certification. So, when people work through this process, like what qualifies them to graduate?
Oh, yeah, that's great. So for the certification, they have to watch or go to all the sessions, and they have to fill out a self-survey. And then there are 10 practice sessions, and there's sheets of how to do that in the learning platform that they have to complete for the certification process. And we really, what we really want to empower people through this process is to identify when they feel ready, as opposed
Yes,
to us saying, okay, you've done this, so that means you're ready. It's like, you've done this. Do you need to do another 10 sessions? Do you need more supervision? Where do you bring your sense of confidence to working with people or groups?
I love that. And I guess the final question is then like, what's the investment to sign up and how do people pay and where do they go and all that stuff?
Yeah.
Actually,
So
we'll just make the link mastinkipp.com/somatic EMDR. So that'll be the link, or you can be on the page right now. So that'll be like mastinkipp.com/somatic EMDR. But what's the investment and all that stuff?
Yeah. We actually have a sliding scale model that was derived from our friend Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, who wanted to create a sliding scale model based on more systemic equality. So on one side, we have a payment plan that's lower than the cost of the program.
Hmm,
And the cost of the
that's rare.
program, yeah. And then there's the cost of the program, and then there's the a rebalancing option, and that's for people who want to support those with less financial funds, so it balances it out and builds more systemic quality in terms of payments. And we keep everything under $2,000. So the lowest plan is just over $1,000, and the highest is just
Wow.
over 2,000. Yeah.
Wow. That's a deal and a half, y'all. So
Yeah.
that's that for
For
everything that you
these.
get, like I can't even imagine. So Scott, thank you so much
Yeah.
for this and for everything. And is there anything else that people need to know or that you want to share about this certification?
Yeah, just go back to, you and I have been doing trauma-informed work for a long time, and just, I've been doing it for nearly 20 years, and I just wholeheartedly believe that if we could get more somatics, if we can get more somatic EMDR, if we can get more of this work into the world, then we truly will start to see such a massive impact that all of
Yes.
us in this field want, else we wouldn't be in this
Yes.
field, no matter what that field is. So if we're listening to
Yes.
this,
Yes.
you are in the field of wanting change and transformation, and these are some of the most potent tools that we have to offer for that.
I love it. Well, y'all, I mean, after this, I hope that you decide to work with Scott and work with all these incredible other people, and teachers and guides in this program. I think the link will probably be on this page
Yeah.
to sign up, and you can do the multiple options. The price point is very, 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 very reasonable for 60 hours of training plus everything else. So if you're looking for something incredible to help you take your practice to the next level, Somatic EMDR with Dr. Scott and all the amazing facilitators through Embody Lab, can't recommend it enough. Dr. Scott, thank you for being here so much today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mastin. Always a pleasure.